Hello everybody, Teching 101 here, and welcome back to Rolls on the High Seas, where we roll a dice and then we talk about the high seas. I got a 7. 7. Now I guess we talk about the high seas. Well, the sea is pretty. It's a big body of water. It's very wet. Very wet, the sea be. It's like, okay. You know who really loves the sea? I'll tell you who really loves the sea. Jinbei. Jinbei spends a lot of his time in the ocean. You know, what with being a fishman and all. And also, he has most recently been employed as the designated driver of the Thousand Sunny. A position that not a lot of people asked for, but a very necessary position. Frankie was the helmsman up until Jinbei, and while Frankie didn't do a bad job necessarily, Frankie is also a bit of a heavy drinker. Granted, it's not alcohol, but you don't know Frankie and what happens with cola. I mean, if Frankie drinks enough carbonated beverages, maybe he does get drunk, or whatever the equivalent be for a cyborg getting drunk. I don't know, but at any rate, maybe the Thousand Sunny, when Frankie was driving it, maybe it swerved a little bit, you know, port side or whatever, and it's like, Frankie, we need to find a designated driver. There wasn't as much zeal with this. Like, remember how Luffy constantly wanted a musician on the crew as far back as, like, the East Blue and in, like, Arlong Park? He's like, we need to find a musician. And, you know, you have to go through, like, okay, I guess we'll find a doctor. Okay, I guess Robin's joining. She's a smart person. Okay. And then, oh, Frankie's a shipwright. Okay, can fix the ship up. Can we get a musician, please? And they finally ran into Brooke, and they finally got a musician, and then after that, nobody was really talking about other positions. I'd say Luffy is pretty content at that point, but then Jinbei showed up, and they had to give him something to do, so it's like, oh no, he can steer the ship really well, alright? So he is the official helmsman, and we see this during Whole Cake Island, where he, you know, tack sails the Sunny around the ocean outside of Whole Cake Island into, you know, leaving Totland, and there's that giant tsunami, that giant wave that's actually a homie that Big Mom summons. Jinbei being very familiar with this, and he's sailing the Sunny through it, and it's a really cool effect in the anime when they're sailing through inside of this giant wave, and then Jinbei's got like one arm on the wheel and another arm with the ropes, and he's adjusting the sails, and it's like, we got this, don't worry, I am Jinbei, I know how to drive, I'm the dad of the crew, you know, so pretty neat. And Nami even admitted, being a navigator, like, wow, this person really knows how to sail a sloop vessel. Okay, I'm not going to go so much into the technical terminology when it comes to sailing, because that's not really my expertise. There was, I've told this story before. One time I was at the doctor's office. My mom was having a checkup done, and I'm in the waiting room, and it was just me and this other dude in the waiting room. He was like an older guy. He kind of looked like Santa Claus, but this was like in August. And some guy came in and sat next down to the Santa Claus guy, and the Santa Claus guy, unprovoked, just started launching into an entire, like monologue about sailing and talking to this guy about sailing. This guy had no idea who this dude was. They were not friends. They did not know each other. And the guy's just sitting there politely. He gets up, he goes into his appointment, and then I'm sitting there reading my book, and then my mom comes out, and it's like, oh, okay, it's time to leave. The Santa Claus guy drops his glasses, and I go and pick up the glasses, and I hand it to him, and I'm like, oh, good book on sailing, and I'm ready to leave, and I don't know why I said that, because he's like, oh, you like sailing, do you? And then he launched into a thing about sailing. So that's the most I learned about sailing from that Santa Claus man. You know, I hope wherever he's at right now in the world, I hope he's happy, I hope he's on a ship, and I hope he's sailing the 7 seas. I hope he's the first person to sail the 7 seas. I hope he's the first person to find the 8th sea. You know, okay, but that's just a little side story about sailing there, so I don't know quite a bit about it. But yeah, so being a helmsman, what did that really entail on pirate vessels back in the day? All right, so being a helmsman, unlike the musician position, could very well have been a dedicated position to have, because somebody needed to be at that wheel at all times. All right, sometimes in One Piece you see it where the Sunny is sailing and it's just like, oh, it's a nice clear day in the Grand Line, we don't need to worry about going anywhere, and the Strats can kind of just chill out and have a light lunch, or you know, whatever they need to do before something crazy happens, right? But in the case in real life, no, you always had to have somebody ready to steer the ship at a moment's notice, especially before like modern GPS and that crap existed, right? You're navigating by, you know, the stars, or like using a sextant or an astrolabe. There was various different sailing techniques. I do know of one. It was called the dead reckoning, which was a way to like position the ship and how far it was from land. Not super accurate, but it's a method that they did use back in the day. And you could get turned around really easy on open ocean, right? You know, you make one wrong calculation, or if you step away and the ship drifts just a little bit starboard side, and you might not end up where you're supposed to be going, and you might end up dying at sea. So somebody had to be at that wheel at all times. Now, obviously, you can't have somebody all times, so there'll be shifts, you know, people switching in and out. But it was definitely a position that was very, very important, and a person had to have a lot of responsibility and be like, hey, we have to trust you now to keep that position. Sometimes the quartermaster would do it, even maybe sometimes the navigator would do it. Whoever was at the helm would also be working closely with the navigator for obvious reasons. You know, constantly like, oh, I will steer the ship, and the navigator will be there with like an astrolabe or a sextant or something and be like, yeah, keep our heading and like everything like that, right? So that's the whole idea there with an actual helmsman, okay? Now, there were a couple of ways that they would do this, like in terms of like sailing the ship. We get a few of them in One Piece. So, I mentioned Jinbei was tack sailing. Okay, so tack sailing is sailing into the wind. All right, so when the wind is coming forward, hitting the sails, pushing you back, there is a way to actually move forward, and it involves moving the ship in like a zigzag type pattern and catching the wind at like 45-degree angles and stuff, forcing the ship to go straight even if it's going into the wind. And so there's a technique for that. Now, Jinbei, being a fishman, being extremely tough, it actually works great because, you know, his muscles are strong enough to like grab onto an entire like sail rig of a ship and just be like, ho, ho, hoist the mizzenmast, sailing, yes, I be Jinbei. You know, like, yes, that makes sense. Now, in real life, you wouldn't be able to do it like that. One person at the helm wouldn't be strong enough to adjust all the sails of a giant ship at once, but Jinbei's able to do that, right? Okay. The opposite of tack sailing into the wind would be jibbing, which is sailing against the wind, downwind, moving the ship that way. I am not making up any of these terms. These are actual sailing words that I looked up like 10 minutes ago, okay? So that's sailing downwind. And then there's also an act called hove to, or heaving to. And that is probably the closest that a helmsman could get to like a break, like being able to step away from the wheel. It's not dropping anchor, but it's like finding a particular spot of the ocean. Like, okay, the weather is calm, there's not a lot of wind, hoist up the sails so they don't catch any wind, and maneuver the ship in a way where it's probably not gonna move very much. It'll still drift a little bit because of ocean currents, so you shouldn't step away from the helm for too long, but this is the kind of idea, you know, just like, okay, this is a position the ship is in where it's probably not going to move too much. If we need to do like light repairs on the vessel, then this is the time to do it. But, you know, you probably shouldn't step away. If the helmsman, hey, you want to step away and get a sandwich really quick, you can do that, get a drink. But, like, honestly, you should be there at all times just because you never know what will happen in open ocean, right? So, yeah, that's the position of a helmsman, being the designated driver. You definitely don't want to be drunk. You know, drunk driving is dangerous with vehicles. I can't imagine being a drunk driver of a large explorer vessel or merchant ship or a pirate ship way back in the day, right? You don't want to be the dude. You don't want to be the captain getting some sleep and then waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to just you wake up and like, oh god, what's happening? You go outside and there's just a giant gash in the side of the ship and just water's pooling in, and you look over at the guy manning the helm and it's like, be sorry, captain, they came out of nowhere. And it's just like, oh, giant rock. Okay, well, I guess we're fucking dead. Do 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 do. And then that's the way it goes, right? All right. So helmsmen in One Piece, there's not very many of them. In fact, the official One Piece wiki only lists 5 characters in the entire One Piece franchise that are officially considered helmsmen. All right, and this is including filler characters as well. We have, are you ready for this lineup? We got Jesus Burgess, ooh-wee! We have Shiki, which I find hilarious that Shiki is officially a helmsman. He's also the captain of the Golden Lion Pirates, or the Flying Lion Pirates, but like the idea that he is also a helmsman because he does have the helm of a ship shoved into his head, okay? We also have Jinbei. That's, you know, helmsman of the Straw Hats makes sense. Hakugan, who is the official helmsman of the Polar Tang for the Heart Pirates, the guy with the mask on Law's crew, he's a helmsman. He's a special kind of helmsman, actually, because he has to pilot a submarine, which is not pretty common in the One Piece world. They do have them, but they're not ubiquitous. And then finally, we have Roger. Not Goldie Roger, but just Roger. Can you imagine having the name Roger in the One Piece world, but you're not Goldie Roger? You'd feel like constantly like, man, I could just never live up to this legacy. Why would they call me Roger? You know, kind of the same thing with Burgess. He's named after Jesus. Can Jesus Burgess live up to Jesus Christ? I mean, Jesus Burgess can lift up a giant mountain. I don't know. I don't remember reading anything about Jesus lifting up a giant mountain. So I don't know about this one, right? Okay. I wonder if Burgess can come back from the dead. We'll have to wait to see. We'll have to see what happens with Burgess's character on where Oda's going to go with this. But these are the 5 characters that are considered helmsmen of the crew, and that's kind of it. There's not very many of them. Is that all I had to say about helmsmen? Is that all I had to say? I mean, like, look, I could go really deep into the technical aspects of this, you know, but then we're just on an informational video about sailing, and any information I could get off of this would just be some quick Googling. All right, like, what do you want me to do? Go out there at the ocean and hop on a boat and just like take a sailing class to do a YouTube video? All right, come on, Barry. We're gonna go take a sailing class. Time I lived up to that Santa Claus dude's final wish for me. All right, here we go. Okay, I actually do have some more stuff to say about it. So, when Nami praised Jinbei's ability to sail the Sunny, Frankie was not there. Remember, Frankie was the dude that made the Sunny. So just by, like, extension, I feel like Frankie would know how to sail a ship a little bit. I mean, he's the one building the mast and the sails and all of the different riggings and everything like that. So I'm imagining Frankie has, like, a little bit of rudimentary knowledge of, like, sailing a vessel. He also built all of the battle Frankies, right? So Frankie was by no means, like, he was not a bad helmsman, okay? It's like, you know how, like, Usopp before Frankie joined was the de facto shipwright of the crew because like nobody else really knew anything about any type of construction. At least Usopp knew a little bit. In fact, that's something in the live action I really like, that he was working in a shipyard at Syrup Village, so he doesn't know a lot, but he knows a little bit of like rudimentary knowledge, more so than like Nami or Zoro, about how to fix a ship, okay? So, you know, before Frankie joined, that's the best they had was Usopp. So I'm not going to say it's the same thing where Frankie was just a shitty helmsman and then when Jinbei showed up, he was like, oh, okay, let me show you how it's done. Because Jinbei is like a highly skilled helmsman. In fact, the first time we see him with these skills is when they're heading from Impel Down to Marineford. Oda always depicted Jinbei being the one, you know, driving the marine ship to Marineford. That was so cool. That was a nice little touch that even as far back as Marineford, Oda planned on Jinbei being a Straw Hat, and he was like, well, let's showcase that he's a helmsman. He's a really skilled helmsman, okay? And it's not a thing that just like everybody that's like, oh, you know, he's a fishman, so he's good at like actually steering a ship. No, this is a skill that he particularly picked up over his years. I guess also because he is a fishman and he's able to communicate with like whale sharks and stuff. Ultimately, if they get lost, you know, Jinbei can just ask the sea life and be like, hey, is this the right way to Karate Island? He's like, yeah, you just make a left over there. He's like, okay, thank you. And I guess Jinbei could just do that if he wanted to. But when Frankie was finally there with Jinbei, when Jinbei showed up when they were getting to Onigashima, this is when Nami was praising Jinbei's skills and was just like, oh, you won't believe Jinbei's steering skills, Frankie. And Frankie's like, oh, so we finally got a guy who can make full use of our ship of dreams, huh? You know, and then Chopper's all excited and just like, oh yeah, we were surfing in a wave. It was so much fun, Frankie. So Frankie was more than happy to be like, oh, okay, well, this is the ship of dreams. This is the Thousand Sunny. I can't wait to see how this expert helmsman handles it, right? So even like several hundred chapters after the Sunny had been revealed and the Straw Hats were sailing around on her, it's interesting now that it's like, oh, this is the Sunny's full power. It was already a really good ship, and Frankie was making sure it was well maintained, but now you have somebody to actually make full use of it, okay? I think we also see it really in a big way when the Straw Hats are approaching Egghead, and there's the giant, blizzard in the middle of that, and Frankie's like, steering the ship. He's like, hold on, everybody, stuff like that. He also does have the job of picking everybody out of the water that's a Devil Fruit user. So whenever somebody falls overboard, Jinbei has to jump in, and I guess Frankie's the one that takes up the helm in the meantime. And if somebody else jumps in and Frankie has to go save them, I guess Chopper will take over. Chopper was the original helmsman, I guess. So I guess no, because they had the Mary before Chopper, but I remember Chopper being in heavy point very often, steering the Mary. Before that, I suppose it was just Zoro, because he would have been the strongest physically. It's like, hey, Zoro, instead of drinking, can you steer the ship in this direction? Like Nami would like tell him where to go. Luffy's not going to steer the ship. He's just going to be hanging out on the figurehead because it's Luffy, right? So I guess it went Zoro, then it went Chopper, then it went Frankie, and now finally dedicated position of Jinbei. So there you go, right? I look forward to seeing him doing some cool moon maneuvers in open ocean later on. Maybe it's going to be really tough to get to Laugh-Tail. It's like once they find all 4 road poneglyphs, it's like, okay, here's Laugh-Tail. But when they get close to it, maybe there's like a giant storm brewing or something, and Jinbei has to like roll up his sleeves and be like, all right, everybody, batten down the hatches. Jinbei puts goggles on for the first time and just like, time we get serious. Da-da-da-da-da. He pushes a button and 3 more wheels come out of the Sunny for some reason. He asked Frankie to install more wheels, and so you just have like Jinbei steering with 3 different wheels at the same time, one with his foot, and he's like, we're gonna make it out of here, don't worry about it. Okay, we're going off the rails a little bit at this point, so now we're just going to roll for the next episode. These are not all going to be very long ones, okay? The more I have to say about it, I mean, like, I think for navigation and shipwrights, when we get to those videos, I'll have more to say, but I had a feeling Helmsman might have been the shortest episode, okay? At any rate, yeah, let's pull this up here. All right, rolls on the high seas. Let's roll this D10. 4. Okay, 4. So that would be Usopp's position, which would be the sharpshooter. I don't believe we've talked about that yet. All right. So in the next episode, we're going to be talking about the sharpshooter, the sniper, or the gunner of a pirate ship. And this is where things get intense because we're talking about naval battles. Naval battles don't really happen a lot in the One Piece world. I mean, they do with the Marines sometimes, but never a lot of positions where they have like Chopper, Usopp, Frankie, man the guns, the Marines are attacking us. It happens very rarely, not very often, but was a very important position during the time of the Great Age of Piracy in our world. So we'll be talking about Usopp's position next time. Thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Teching, signing out. Batten down the hatches! This is the sound of a wheel. It's how wheels sounded.